In 2016, a 29-year-old wildlife photographer drove into the Nevada desert and never came back. Her car was found, her campsite was undisturbed, but Kiera Brennan herself had vanished into thin air. For 3 years, her case remained frozen, another tragic story of a person swallowed by the vast, unforgiving wilderness. It wasn't until a local rancher decided to inspect a forgotten Cold War bunker on his property that the silence was broken. Inside, he found a single military-grade sack wired shut. What spilled out wasn't just ash. It was the horrifying evidence that Kiera never left the desert. And the temperatures required to create it revealed a truth more terrifying than any animal attack or accidental fall. Someone hadn't just killed her, they had tried to erase her from existence. Before we go further into what happened to Kiera Brennan, I want to hear from you. Have you ever gone camping alone in a remote area? What precautions did you take? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers around the world. And if you're new to Last Seen Stories, be sure to hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss the chilling conclusion to this case. Now let's talk about who Kiera Brennan was, because understanding her life is the only way to understand the horror of her death. Kiera Brennan was 29 years old when she disappeared. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She was a professional wildlife photographer who had spent years documenting the harsh beauty of the American West, specializing in desert ecosystems where most people saw only emptiness. She saw life, subtle, resilient, breathtaking. Born in 1987 in Bend, Oregon, Kiera grew up hiking the Cascade Mountains with her older sister, Thea. Their parents were both educators, practical people who taught their daughters to be self-sufficient and curious. Kiera took to the outdoors naturally. By the time she was in high school, she was leading day hikes for younger students. By college, she was camping alone in the backcountry, armed with a camera and an eye for detail that would eventually earn her a living. After graduating from Oregon State University with a degree in environmental science, Kiera decided to pursue photography full-time. It was a gamble, but it paid off. By 2010, her work was appearing in regional magazines. By 2012, she had pieces published in Outside Magazine and Desert Review, national outlets that gave her credibility and just enough income to keep going. In 2015, she moved to Reno, Nevada. The decision was strategic. Reno sits at the edge of the Great Basin, one of the most geologically diverse and photographically rich areas in the country. Within a few hours' drive, Kiera could access salt flats, volcanic rock formations, high desert plateaus, and mountain ranges that seemed to rise out of nowhere. She told Thea it felt like living on another planet. Physically, Kiera was small but strong, 5'6", athletic build, with auburn hair she usually wore in a single braid. There was a scar on her left forearm from a rock climbing accident in her early 20s, a jagged white line she never bothered to hide. Friends described her as quietly confident, the kind of person who didn't need to fill silence with chatter. She preferred the company of landscapes to people. Though she wasn't antisocial, she just understood solitude differently than most. Her apartment in Reno was modest, a one-bedroom on the southern edge of the city with a view of the desert stretching toward the mountains. The walls were covered with prints of her work, sweeping vistas, macro shots of lizards and wildflowers, the way light broke over stone at dawn. Her landlord, a retired teacher named Mrs. Ortega, remembered her as reliable and polite. She always paid rent early, Ortega said later. She'd say hello if we passed each other, but she didn't linger. She had places to be. By early 2016, Kiera had been planning a trip to the Ruby Valley Desert for months. That winter had brought rare, heavy rains to Nevada, and she knew what that meant: a spring bloom. Wildflowers that spent most of their lives as dormant seeds would burst into color for just a few weeks before the heat killed them again. It was a narrow window, and Kiera wanted to capture it. She told her sister about the trip in early February. Thea, a civil engineer living in Portland, was used to these calls. Kiera always filed detailed trip plans with her: routes, coordinates, expected return dates. It was a system they developed over the years, a way for Thea to have peace of mind and for Kiera to maintain her independence. The itinerary for Ruby Valley was thorough. Kiera planned to camp near a place called Clover Pass, a remote area roughly 90 miles east of Reno. She'd spend 7 days hiking, photographing, and documenting the bloom. She'd carry a satellite phone for emergencies, though cell service was non-existent out there. She'd check in with Thea every evening around sunset. Kiera's last social media post went live on February 19, 2016. It was a photo of her camera gear laid out on her bed. Lenses, batteries, memory cards, everything organized with the precision of someone who had done this 100 times. The caption read, "Heading to the quiet places." Back in a week. The post got 143 likes. A few friends commented with variations of, "Be safe," and "Can't wait to see the photos." One of them, a photographer named Ivan Cross, who had dated Kiera years earlier, wrote, "Don't get lost out there." She never replied. On the morning of February 20, 2016, Kiera Brennan locked her apartment, loaded her beige 2012 Toyota 4Runner, and drove east. The forecast was clear. Highs in the mid-50s, lows in the 30s, no storms expected. Perfect conditions. Her neighbor, Mrs. Ortega, saw her leave around 8:47 in the morning. She remembered because she was watering her plants on the balcony and Kiera waved as she pulled out of the parking lot. It was the last time anyone in Reno saw her alive. The drive to Ruby Valley would take roughly 3 hours. The route followed Highway 50, a 2-lane road that stretched across Nevada like a scar, connecting Reno to the empty heart of the state. Locals called it the loneliest road in America, and they weren't exaggerating. Between towns, there was nothing, just desert, sky, and the occasional ghost of a mining operation that had dried up decades ago. Kiera knew the road well. She'd driven it before on other trips, always alone, always prepared. She carried a week's worth of food, a water filtration system, a camp stove, a first aid kit, and enough camera equipment to fill half the back of her 4Runner. She also carried something else, a field journal, a leather-bound notebook where she recorded observations, coordinates, weather patterns, and thoughts. Colleagues who had worked with her said she never went anywhere without it. By all accounts, Kiera Brennan was careful, experienced, and excited. She had no enemies, no financial troubles, no reason to disappear. She wasn't running from anything. She was running towards something, light, color, the fleeting beauty of a desert in bloom. She had no idea she was driving toward her death. The last confirmed sighting of Kiera Brennan was at a gas station on Highway 50 in Dayton, Nevada, a small town about 30 miles east of Reno. The time was 10:15 in the morning. Surveillance cameras captured her pulling into the station in her 4Runner, parking at pump number 3. The footage is grainy but clear enough. She's wearing jeans, a dark fleece jacket, and hiking boots. Her auburn hair is pulled back. She moves with purpose, fills the tank, pays inside, buys a few items. The cashier that day was a man named Dutch Keller, 58 years old, a lifelong resident of Dayton who had worked at the same gas station for over a decade. When police interviewed him later, he remembered Kiera clearly. She asked about the back roads to Ruby Valley, he said, wanted to know if they were washed out from the winter rains. I told her they were passable, but muddy in spots. She seemed experienced, though, wasn't nervous or anything. She bought trail mix, a couple bottles of water, and a paper map. Said her GPS could be unreliable out there. Keller described her as calm, polite, focused. She didn't linger. She thanked him, took her change, and left. At 10:37 a.m., the surveillance footage shows her 4Runner pulling back onto Highway 50, heading east. That was the last time anyone saw her in person. At 2:34 p.m., Kiera's satellite phone registered a signal. The location placed her near the entrance to Clover Pass, deep in the Ruby Valley Desert, exactly where she'd planned to be. The signal lasted less than a minute, long enough to confirm she'd arrived, but no call was made. And then, nothing. Kiera had promised Thea she'd check in every evening. They'd done this routine on every solo trip, a quick call around sunset just to say she was okay. It was their compromise. Thea got peace of mind, Kiera got her solitude. On February 21, the call didn't come. Thea wasn't immediately worried. Satellite phones were finicky. Coverage could drop if Kiera was in a canyon or behind a ridge. She'd probably call the next day with an apology and a story about the light being so perfect she'd lost track of time. But February 22nd came and went, still nothing. By February 23rd, Thea's worry had sharpened into something heavier. She tried calling Kiera's phone repeatedly. Each time it went straight to a generic voicemail. She sent text messages, knowing they might not go through, but needing to try anyway. "Kiera, call me. I'm starting to worry. Please just check in, even if it's just a few words. I'm serious, call me." No response. By February 24th, Thea was calling Kiera's friends, asking if anyone had heard from her. No one had. She contacted Ivan Cross, the ex-boyfriend, thinking maybe Kiera had mentioned something to him. He hadn't spoken to her in weeks. February 25th and 26th dragged by in agonizing silence. February 27th was the day Kiera was supposed to come home. Thea spent the entire day staring at her phone, waiting for a call, a text, anything. She told herself there was a rational explanation. Kiera had decided to stay an extra day. Her phone had died. She'd gotten delayed. But when the sun set on February 27th and her phone stayed silent, Thea got in her car and drove to Kiera's apartment in Reno. She arrived around 10 p.m. The apartment was dark. The 4Runner wasn't in the parking lot. Thea used the spare key Kiera had given her and went inside. Everything was exactly as Kiera had left it. The bed was made, dishes were washed. The only thing out of place was the absence. Kiera's camera bag was gone, her hiking boots were gone, her field journal wasn't on the desk where she usually kept it. Thea stood in the middle of the apartment and felt the floor drop out from under her. At 11:03 p.m. on February 28, 2016, Thea Brennan walked into the Lyon County Sheriff's Office and filed a missing person report. The deputy who took the report was a young officer named Torres. He listened carefully, took notes, asked the standard questions. Had Kiera ever disappeared before? No. Was she struggling with anything? Depression, financial trouble, relationship issues? No, no, and no. Did she have any reason to leave voluntarily? Absolutely not. Torres explained that in cases involving adults, there was typically a waiting period. Adults had the right to go missing if they wanted to. But Thea pushed back hard. "My sister doesn't just disappear," she said, her voice steady but edged with steel. "She left me her itinerary for a reason. She's been gone for over a week with no contact. Something is wrong." Torres must have heard something in her voice, or maybe he just believed her, because he escalated the case. By March 1, Kiera Brennan's disappearance was no longer being treated as a voluntary absence. It was officially a missing person investigation. On March 2, 2016, a search team was dispatched to the Ruby Valley Desert. The team consisted of 6 sheriff's deputies, 2 search and rescue volunteers, and a canine unit, a German shepherd named Ranger trained to track human scent. The weather was clear but cold. Temperatures overnight had dropped into the low 30s, and the ground was still muddy from the winter rains. They started at the coordinates Kiera had given Thea, the area around Clover Pass. It was a broad, open stretch of high desert dotted with scrub brush and volcanic rock. The landscape was harsh but not impossible. If Kiera had been there, she should have left some trace. At first, they found tire tracks that could have belonged to a 4Runner, but the mud and wind had degraded them. They couldn't confirm it was her vehicle. Ranger, the search dog, picked up a scent trail near a dried creek bed. His handler, a veteran named Floyd Reese, followed as the dog pulled toward a low ridge about half a mile from the road. The scent held for roughly 200 yards, and then it vanished. Ranger circled, whined, searched again. Nothing. "It's like she just stopped existing," Reese said later. "The dog was tracking something, and then it was gone. That doesn't happen unless the scent got washed away or the person got into a vehicle." While the main search continued, one of the deputies, a man named Hollis, who would later take over the investigation, found something odd. About a mile and a half from where they'd expected Kiera to camp, there was a fire ring, a circle of stones arranged deliberately with a bed of ash in the center. Hollis knelt beside it and touched the ash. It was cold, days old at least. But there was a lot of it, more than you'd expect from a normal campfire. He noted it in his report, but at the time it didn't seem significant. They searched for 3 more days. They covered over 20 square miles, calling Kiera's name, looking for any sign of her tent, her gear, her body. They found nothing. By March 5, resources were stretched thin. The sheriff's department couldn't justify keeping a dozen people in the desert indefinitely. The search was scaled back. But then, on March 7, a volunteer named Gabrielle Sung found something. She was searching a rocky outcropping about 2 miles southeast of the fire ring when she spotted something small and black wedged between 2 stones. She picked it up and realized it was a lens cap, specifically a lens cap for a Canon 5D Mark IV, the exact model Kiera used. Gabrielle radioed the discovery immediately. Detective Hollis, now deeply involved in the case, came to examine it personally. The lens cap was dusty but intact, no damage. It could have been dropped recently or been there for weeks. The location was strange. It was far from the expected camping area, and the terrain was rough. No clear reason for Kiera to have been there, unless she was fleeing, chasing a shot, or being moved. Hollis bagged the lens cap as evidence. It was the first confirmed trace of Kiera Brennan they'd found. 5 days later, on March 12, the case broke open. A hiker named Rosalind Cho was exploring an old mining access road about 5 miles from Clover Pass when she saw a vehicle parked in a clearing. It was beige, covered in dust, and had been there long enough that sand had drifted against the tires. She approached cautiously and recognized the make and model, a Toyota 4Runner. Rosalind checked the license plate against a photo she'd seen online. It matched. She called 911 immediately. Within 2 hours, the site was swarming with law enforcement. Sheriff's deputies, forensic technicians, and Detective Hollis all converged on the location. The 4Runner sat alone on a narrow dirt road that branched off from the main route, barely wide enough for one vehicle. The road led toward a cluster of abandoned mines, relics of Nevada's mining boom that had died decades ago. The vehicle's doors were locked. The windows were intact. There were no signs of a crash, no bullet holes, no damage of any kind. It looked like Kiera had simply parked, locked the doors, and walked away. Using a lockout tool, deputies opened the driver's side door. Inside, everything was unnervingly ordinal. Kiera's purse sat on the passenger seat, her wallet inside with her ID, credit cards, and $140 in cash, untouched. The satellite phone was in the cup holder. When forensic technicians powered it on, the battery was completely dead, but the last registered signal matched the 2:34 p.m. ping from February 20. On the passenger seat, partially unfolded, was the paper map she'd bought at the gas station. The Clover Pass area was circled in pencil just as she'd planned. But the back of the 4Runner was empty. No tent, no sleeping bag, no camera equipment, no backpack. Kiera had unloaded her gear and left on foot. Detective Hollis examined the scene carefully. The ground around the vehicle was hard-packed dirt and rock, not ideal for preserving footprints, but forensic techs found faint impressions leading away from the 4Runner toward the southeast, the same direction as the rocky terrain where the lens cap had been found. Then, under the driver's seat, a technician found something odd. It was a crumpled gas station receipt, dated February 20, 10:15 a.m., the stop in Dayton. But on the back, written in blue pen, was a phone number. 7 digits, no area code. Hollis immediately ran the number. It came back to a Nevada area code, but the line had been disconnected. The last registered owner was listed as J. Halford, with an address in Sparks, Nevada, dating back to 2014. Current records showed no one by that name at that address. The trail was cold before it even started. Why had Kiera written down a phone number? Was it someone she planned to meet? Someone who had given her directions? Or something else entirely? There were no answers. On March 14, 2 days after finding the 4Runner, search teams discovered something even more unsettling. About a mile from where the vehicle was parked, tucked into a rocky alcove that provided natural shelter from the wind, they found Kiera's campsite.
The tent was still standing. It was a lightweight, two-person model in dark green, staked securely into the ground. Inside, her sleeping bag was rolled up neatly. Her camp stove sat beside a fuel canister that was still nearly full. Food supplies were organized in a stuff sack: energy bars, dried fruit, instant oatmeal, enough for at least 5 more days. 3 water bottles sat lined up near the tent entrance. 3 were full, 2 were empty. Her first aid kit was unopened. Her backpack was inside the tent, but when investigators opened it, 2 critical items were missing: her camera and her field journal. Detective Hollis stood in that campsite and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature.
"This looks like she intended to return," he told his team. "You don't leave your shelter, your water, and your food unless you're coming back. Something made her leave in a hurry, or someone took her." Search dogs were brought back to the campsite. Ranger, the same German Shepherd who had lost Kiera's scent weeks earlier, picked up a trail leading northwest from the tent. The dog moved with purpose, nose to the ground, pulling his handler across scrubland and over rocky outcroppings. The trail held for nearly a mile, and then, at the edge of a flat plateau of volcanic rock, the scent vanished again. Ranger circled, searched, whined in frustration. There was nothing. It was as if Kiera Brennan had been erased. For the next week, over 100 volunteers joined the search. They combed every inch of the surrounding area. A helicopter equipped with thermal imaging flew grid patterns over the desert, searching for heat signatures. Divers checked a seasonal creek that still had water from the winter rains, thinking perhaps she had fallen in and drowned. They found nothing. On March 22nd, Detective Hollis held a press conference. Reporters from Reno, Las Vegas, and even national outlets attended. Hollis stood at a podium, looking exhausted, and delivered a statement that would be replayed on news channels for days. "We have not found Kiera Brennan," he said. "We have found her vehicle, her campsite, and evidence that she was in the area, but we have not found her. Someone with Ms. Brennan's experience doesn't just vanish. We are asking anyone who was in the Ruby Valley area in late February to contact us." Even the smallest detail could be critical. Behind him, a photograph of Kiera was projected on a screen. Her smiling face, auburn hair, the scar on her forearm visible in the shot. She looked vibrant, alive, full of the quiet confidence that everyone who knew her described. But the desert had swallowed her whole. Theories began to circulate almost immediately. Some believed she had suffered an accident, fallen into an unseen mine shaft, been bitten by a rattlesnake, succumbed to exposure. But searchers had been thorough. Where was the body? Others whispered about wildlife. Mountain lions roamed the area. Perhaps she had been attacked, dragged away. But there was no blood, no torn clothing, no signs of struggle. And then there was the darkest theory, the one Detective Hollis couldn't ignore: abduction. Someone had taken Kiera Brennan. And if that was true, the question wasn't just where she was, it was what had been done to her. By the end of March 2016, the active search was suspended. The case remained open, but with no new leads, there was nowhere left to look. Kiera Brennan had become another name on a list, missing in the desert, presumed dead, but never found. For 3 years, the silence held. By the summer of 2016, Kiera Brennan's case had slipped from the front pages. Local news stations ran occasional updates: "Still missing, family seeks answers," but the stories grew shorter, less frequent, until they stopped altogether. For the Lyon County Sheriff's Office, Kiera became a file in a cabinet, a case reviewed periodically but without new leads to pursue. Detective Hollis kept the file on his desk longer than protocol required. He couldn't shake the feeling that they'd missed something, that the answer was out there, buried in the same desert that had hidden Kiera. But without evidence, without witnesses, there was nothing to investigate. The case was cold. For Thea Brennan, the silence was unbearable. In the months following Kiera's disappearance, Thea tried to return to her life in Portland. She went back to work as a civil engineer, showed up to the office, sat at her desk.
But she couldn't focus. Every time her phone buzzed, she thought it might be news. Every time someone knocked on her door, her heart jumped. By the fall of 2016, Thea made a decision that everyone around her thought was a mistake. She quit her job, sold her apartment, and moved to Reno. She rented a small one-bedroom near Kira's old place and dedicated herself to a single mission: finding out what happened to her sister. Thea wasn't an investigator. She had no training in forensics or search and rescue. But she had something more powerful. She refused to let Kira become a statistic. She created social media pages, Find Kira Brennan, and posted regularly. Photos of Kira, timelines, maps, updates on the investigation. She asked people to share, to spread the word, to keep Kira's name alive. She printed flyers and drove to every small town within 100 miles of Ruby Valley: Lovelock, Austin, Eureka, Ellie. She taped Kira's face to bulletin boards in gas stations, diners, laundromats. She talked to ranchers, truckers, miners, anyone who spent time in the desert. She asked the same question over and over. Did you see anything in February 2016? Anything unusual? Most people were kind, but had nothing to offer. A few were annoyed by her persistence. One gas station owner in Austin told her bluntly, "Lady, people disappear out here all the time. The desert doesn't give them back." Thea kept going. She befriended long-haul truckers who drove Highway 50 regularly, asking them to keep their eyes open. She joined online forums dedicated to missing persons cases, comparing notes with families facing similar nightmares. She even hired a private investigator, a former Reno police officer named Douglas Neal, using the last of her savings. Neal worked the case for 4 months. He re-interviewed witnesses, reviewed the forensic reports, and spent days driving the back roads of Ruby Valley searching for anything the original search teams might have missed. In April 2017, he delivered his final report to Thea. It was 3 pages long and concluded with a sentence that felt like a door slamming shut. No signs of a crime were found. The desert has erased everything. Thea fired him the next day. She wasn't angry at Neal. She was angry at the universe, at the cruelty of not knowing, at the fact that her sister had been reduced to a cold case file and a stack of flyers that no one read anymore. But she didn't stop. In the summer of 2017, Thea received something that changed everything. It arrived in her mailbox on August 14, a postcard with no return address. The front showed a generic image of the Nevada desert at sunset, the kind sold in gas stations across the state. The postmark was from LI, Nevada, a small town about 90 miles southeast of Ruby Valley. On the back, written in block letters with a black pen, was a single sentence: "Sometimes the desert keeps what it burns." Thea stared at the postcard for a long time. Her hands were shaking. She immediately took it to the sheriff's office. Detective Hollis examined it carefully, then sent it to the forensics lab. Handwriting analysis came back inconclusive. The letters were printed, not cursive, deliberately uniform, impossible to match to a known sample. The postcard itself was a mass-produced item available at dozens of locations across Nevada. The postmark gave them a location, but nothing more. Detectives canvassed LI, asking if anyone remembered someone mailing a postcard in mid-August. No one did. The message itself was haunting. Sometimes the desert keeps what it burns. Was it a confession? A taunt? A clue? Hollis asked Thea if the phrase meant anything to her. It didn't. Kira had never used those words, never mentioned fire in relation to her trips. The postcard went into the evidence file, and the investigation stalled again. For Thea, though, it was proof. Someone out there knew what had happened to Kira. Someone had taken the time to mail a cryptic message, to remind her that the case wasn't over. And if someone knew, that meant answers were possible. By 2018, Thea's obsession had consumed her. She was living out of a small trailer parked near Highway 447, close enough to Ruby Valley that she could drive out whenever she wanted. She'd stopped attending social events, stopped responding to friends' messages. Her entire life had narrowed to a single focus: Kira. People in the area knew her by sight. The woman who put up the flyers, the woman who asked the questions. Some felt sympathy, others thought she'd lost her mind. A clerk at a gas station in Austin recalled seeing Thea drive past late at night, headlights cutting through the darkness, heading toward the desert alone. "I worried about her," the clerk said later. "She looked like someone who wasn't planning to come back." But Thea always came back, because she wasn't looking for peace. She was looking for proof. In late 2018, strange stories began to circulate among locals. Stories about lights in the desert at night, seen from Highway 50 by truckers and travelers. Not headlights, something else. Flickering like lanterns or campfires in areas where no one should be camping. A hunter named Dale Henson reported seeing smoke rising from a hillside near an old mining area in November 2018. He thought it was a wildfire and called it in, but when rangers checked, they found nothing. No burn scar, no embers, no explanation. Another report came from a couple driving through Ruby Valley at dusk. They claimed they saw a figure standing on a ridge, silhouetted against the sky, holding something that reflected the last light. Maybe a flashlight, maybe something else. When they looked again, the figure was gone. These stories were dismissed as the kinds of things people see when they stare into emptiness for too long. The desert plays tricks. Shadows become shapes. Silence becomes sound. But for Thea, every story was a potential lead. She followed each one, driving into the desert at night, searching for lights, for smoke, for the figure on the ridge. She found nothing, but she kept searching. Detective Hollis, now in his late 50s and thinking about retirement, watched Thea's descent with a mixture of admiration and sadness. He knew what unresolved cases did to families. He'd seen it before. The not knowing was worse than knowing the worst. In a conversation with a fellow detective in early 2019, Hollis said, "I think Kiera Brennan is dead. I think someone killed her, but I also think we'll never find her. The desert's too big. It's been too long." He was wrong. On March 18, 2019, Garrett Voss cut open a canvas sack in a forgotten bunker and found the remains of Kiera Brennan. And the case that had been cold for 3 years ignited again. Garrett Voss had owned land in the Ruby Valley Desert for 3 decades. The 1,200 acres were mostly worthless, rocky, arid, unsuitable for grazing cattle. He used a small portion near the access road for his ranch operations, but the rest sat untouched, a vast stretch of scrubland that generated nothing but property taxes. In early March 2019, a real estate investor from Reno contacted Voss with an offer. The man wanted to buy a parcel of land on the northeastern edge of Voss's property for a solar panel installation. The offer was fair, and Voss was getting older. He agreed, with one condition. The buyer wanted to see the entire parcel first, including the old bunker. Voss hadn't been to the bunker in over a decade. There was no reason to. It was a relic from the Cold War era, built in the early 1960s when the government thought rural Nevada might need fallout shelters. By the 1970s, it had been abandoned and eventually sold off with the land. Voss had checked it once when he first bought the property and found it empty, just a concrete room slowly being reclaimed by the desert. But now he needed to show it to a potential buyer. On the afternoon of March 18th, Voss fired up his ATV and drove out to the bunker. It took him 40 minutes to reach it, following an old dirt trail that had mostly disappeared under sand and brush. The bunker sat half-buried in a low hillside, the concrete walls cracked and weathered, the metal door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Voss parked the ATV and approached cautiously. Rattlesnakes liked places like this, cool, dark, undisturbed. He called out, banged on the doorframe, waited. No sound. He pulled the door open. The hinges groaned. The smell hit him immediately. Acrid, metallic, wrong. Not the smell of decay, which he knew from dealing with dead livestock. This was something else. Something burned. Voss switched on his flashlight and stepped inside. The bunker was a single room, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with a low ceiling and bare concrete walls. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by his entrance. The floor was empty except for a few scattered stones and, in the far corner, a large canvas sack. The sack was military-grade, heavy-duty fabric, the kind used for duffel bags or equipment transport. It was sealed with wire twisted tight around the top. Voss approached slowly. The smell was stronger near the sack. Burned metal, something chemical, something old. He knelt beside it. The sack was heavy, sagging under its own weight. He pulled out his pocket knife and cut the wire. The fabric parted. Gray ash spilled out. Voss widened the opening, and more ash poured onto the concrete floor, fine as powder. But underneath he could feel something solid, something with mass. He tilted the sack, and the ash shifted. That's when he saw it. A human jawbone, teeth intact, emerging from the gray like a stone surfacing from water. Voss dropped the knife. His flashlight beam wavered across the sack, the ash, the bone. He stumbled backward, pulling his phone from his pocket with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? I found something. A body. I think it's a body. In a bunker on my property. Sir, can you confirm the location? Voss gave the dispatcher his coordinates, his voice unsteady.
He stayed outside the bunker, leaning against the ATV, staring at the crooked door and the darkness inside. Within 90 minutes, the site was swarming with law enforcement. Sheriff's deputies arrived first, securing the area and confirming Voss's discovery. Then came the forensic team from Lyon County, and finally Detective Hollis, who had been in a meeting when he got the call. Hollis stood at the entrance to the bunker, looking at the sack and the ash spilled across the floor, and felt something heavy settle in his chest. He'd been a detective for 22 years. He'd worked homicides, disappearances, cases that haunted him. But this was different. The forensic team worked carefully. They photographed the scene from every angle, documented the position of the sack, the ash, the bones visible inside. Then, wearing gloves and masks, they began to extract the contents. As they carefully emptied the sack, the full horror became clear. Inside was approximately 60 pounds of gray ash, fine and uniform, mixed with bone fragments. The bones were brittle, calcined, a term used to describe bone that has been exposed to such extreme heat that it turns white and crumbles easily. The remains included a partial jawbone with teeth intact, fragments of the skull, pieces of long bones, femur, tibia, vertebrae, ribs, small fragments that were difficult to identify. There was no soft tissue, no skin, no muscle, no organs, complete cremation. But mixed in with the ash and bone were other things. Melted metal fragments, twisted, blackened, unrecognizable at first. Later analysis would identify them as pieces of a camera, lens mounts, part of a shutter mechanism, fragments of a battery compartment. A small metal ring, partially melted but still recognizable. Gold, with an inscription so faint it was almost invisible. Fragments of synthetic fabric, nylon, polyester, melted into hard lumps. And something else that made Detective Hollis's blood run cold. Scratches on the interior wall of the bunker, near where the sack had been sitting. He knelt beside the wall and shone his flashlight across the surface. The scratches were deliberate, not random. They formed partial letters, help, and below it, barely visible, K. Hollis stood there, staring at the wall, and felt a wave of nausea. Kiera Brennan had been alive in this bunker. She had tried to call for help, and then someone had burned her. The forensic team worked through the night. The remains were carefully bagged and transported to the Washoe County Laboratory in Reno for analysis. The ash was sampled. The bunker was photographed, measured, documented. Near the center of the floor, forensic techs found burn marks, scored into the concrete in a circular pattern about 4 feet in diameter. The heat had been so intense that the surface of the concrete had melted, leaving a glassy, discolored scar. A forensic specialist named Dr. Yolanda Frisch, the medical examiner for Lyon County, examined the burn pattern and made a preliminary estimate. The temperature in this bunker had exceeded 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That wasn't a campfire. That wasn't an accident. That was industrial-level heat. Outside the bunker, forensic techs found faint tire tracks leading away from the site. They were old, degraded by wind and time, but they suggested a vehicle had been here, probably years ago. They also found fragments of a propane canister about 30 yards from the bunker, corroded and half buried. The manufacturing date stamped on the metal indicated it was produced sometime between 2015 and 2017. Detective Hollis stood in the desert as the sun set, watching his team work. The wind kicked up dust, and the temperature dropped fast, the way it always did in the desert after dark. He thought about Kiera Brennan, 29 years old, experienced, careful, driving into this desert with a camera and a tent, expecting to document wildflowers. She'd ended up in a bunker, burning. Hollis didn't sleep that night. The next day, March 19, the first question was the same question everyone was asking. Whose remains were in that sack? DNA analysis would take weeks, but Hollis already knew. He called Thea Brennan and asked her to come to the sheriff's office. When she arrived, he sat her down in a quiet room and told her what they'd found. Thea didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, and stared at the wall. Was it her? She finally asked. We're waiting on DNA confirmation, Hollis said. But yes, I believe it's Kiera. Thea nodded slowly. Then she asked the question that would define the next phase of the investigation. How did she burn? The remains recovered from the bunker were transported to the Nevada State Crime Lab in Reno. Chief forensic anthropologist Dr. Leon Varga was assigned to the case, along with Dr. Yolanda Frisch, the medical examiner, and a forensic chemist named Dr. Enos Mora. The challenge was immediate. Cremated bone is notoriously difficult to work with. The extreme heat destroys most biological markers, including DNA. But Dr. Varga had experience with cases like this. He knew that certain parts of the skeleton, specifically the petrous portion of the temporal bone, a dense section near the inner ear, could preserve DNA even after exposure to high temperatures. The team selected the least damaged fragments and began the painstaking process of extraction. First, the bone was cleaned and ground into a fine powder. Then, using a specialized chemical process, they isolated mitochondrial DNA, a type of DNA that's more resistant to degradation than nuclear DNA, and can be used to establish familial relationships. The process took 6 weeks. The first attempt failed. The DNA was too degraded, the sample too small. Dr. Varga tried again, this time using a newer PCR amplification technique that could work with smaller DNA fragments. On April 30, 2019, the results came back. The mitochondrial DNA from the bone matched a reference sample provided by Thea Brennan with a probability of 99.7%. The remains were Kiera Brennan. Detective Hollis drove to Thea's trailer that afternoon. He found her sitting outside, staring at the desert. He didn't need to say anything. She saw his face and knew. It's her, Thea said. Not a question, a statement. Yes. Thea closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were dry. She'd already done her crying. How did she die? Hollis hesitated. We don't know yet. Dr. Frisch is still working on the cause of death. But Thea, she was burned, deliberately. Thea nodded slowly. I know. The postcard. Sometimes the desert keeps what it burns. Someone told me. They told me 3 years ago, and I didn't understand. On May 2, 2019, the Lyon County Sheriff's Office held a press conference. Sheriff Klaus stood at a podium, flanked by Detective Hollis and Dr. Frisch. Camera flashes lit up the room. We can confirm that the remains found on March 18th in a bunker in Ruby Valley have been positively identified as Kiera Brennan, who disappeared in February 2016. We are treating this as a homicide investigation. We are asking anyone with information to contact our office immediately. The room erupted with questions. How did she die? Do you have suspects? Was she alive in the bunker? Klaus held up a hand. We cannot comment on the specifics of the investigation at this time. What I can tell you is that we will not rest until we find who did this. The story exploded across national media. Cable news picked it up. True crime podcasts dedicated episodes to it. Kiera's face was back on screens and front pages, but this time the headline wasn't missing, it was murdered. While the media frenzy unfolded, the forensic team continued their work.
Dr. Mora, the forensic chemist, analyzed the ash composition in detail. Her findings were chilling. The ash contained human bone fragments, calcined at temperatures between 1400 and 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, synthetic materials, nylon, likely tent material, polyester, clothing, plastics, camera housing, organic material, minimal wood ash, suggesting wood wasn't the primary fuel, accelerant traces, chemical signatures consistent with propane or butane, metal particulates, aluminum, copper, magnesium, all melted, silicon dioxide, higher concentration than expected, suggesting sand or refractory cement was present. The last finding was critical. Refractory cement is a specialized material used to line industrial kilns, furnaces, and high-temperature equipment. It's designed to withstand extreme heat without breaking down. Dr. Mora's conclusion was stark. The victim and her belongings were burned together in a sustained, high-temperature fire, likely using accelerants. The presence of refractory cement suggests the use of an engineered heat source, possibly a kiln, a furnace, or an improvised cremation device. This wasn't a campfire. This wasn't even a bonfire. Someone had built or brought equipment capable of cremating a human body. Dr. Frisch, the medical examiner, faced a more difficult task: determining cause of death.
The bones were too damaged to show clear signs of trauma. There were no bullet fragments, no fractures consistent with blunt force, no obvious indicators. But there was one detail that caught her attention. The hyoid bone, a small horseshoe-shaped bone in the throat, showed a fracture pattern. Hyoid fractures are often associated with strangulation, but they can also result from extreme heat and pressure, so the finding wasn't definitive. Dr. Frisch's official report, filed on May 15, 2019, read, "Cause of death, undetermined due to condition of remains. Manner of death, homicide. The victim was likely killed prior to cremation, possibly by asphyxiation or trauma, though definitive determination is impossible given the state of the remains." One piece of evidence, however, was unambiguous. The melted ring found in the ash was sent to a jewelry analyst. After cleaning, the inscription was barely visible but readable: KB, never lost. Thea confirmed it immediately. It was a gift from their parents on Kira's 25th birthday. Kira wore it on her right hand, always. "Even melted," Thea said quietly, "she's still wearing it." The forensic analysis gave investigators a clearer picture of what had happened, but it also deepened the horror. Kira Blannon had been taken to a bunker. She had scratched a message on the wall, and then someone had burned her so thoroughly that almost nothing remained. The question now was, who? With Kira's death confirmed as a homicide, the investigation shifted from search and rescue to criminal pursuit. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted. Special Agent Victoria Sung flew in from Quantico to review the case. After studying the crime scene photos, forensic reports, and timeline, she delivered a profile. "The person who did this is organized, methodical, and patient," she said. "This wasn't a crime of passion. It was planned." The killer had access to specialized equipment, a furnace, a kiln, or a portable cremation device. They knew the area well enough to choose a remote bunker that hadn't been visited in years. They're likely local or very familiar with Ruby Valley. They're comfortable working with fire and high-temperature equipment, possibly military or industrial background. She paused, then added, "And they're not done. This level of planning, this kind of disposal, it suggests experience. Kira may not have been the first." The room went silent. Detective Hollis began the grim task of building a suspect list. First, he revisited everyone connected to Kira. Ivan Cross, her ex-boyfriend, was cleared quickly. He'd been in Oregon during her disappearance, confirmed by multiple witnesses and credit card records. Dutch Keller, the gas station owner who'd spoken to Kira on February 20, was investigated more thoroughly. He had a history of minor offenses, trespassing, a DUI from 1999, but nothing violent. His connection to Ruby Valley was minimal. Hollis kept him as a person of interest, but couldn't link him to the bunker.
The mysterious phone number on the receipt, J. Halford, remained a dead end. Despite extensive searches, no one by that name could be located. Hollis expanded the search. Who had been working in Ruby Valley in February 2016? The area saw occasional activity: mineral surveyors, claim stakers, contractors doing geological assessments. Hollis pulled records from the Bureau of Land Management and began cross-referencing names. Dozens of contractors had passed through the region between 2015 and 2017. Most had moved on, difficult to trace, but one name stood out: Floyd Tennyson. Tennyson, 47 at the time, had filed mineral survey reports for a private client in February and March 2016. The location? Within 8 miles of where Kira's Forerunner had been found. Hollis pulled Tennyson's background.
He'd worked various jobs across Nevada, Utah, and Wyoming: surveyor, handyman, general contractor. But between 2008 and 2011, he'd been employed at a crematorium in Salt Lake City, Utah. Hollis felt his pulse quicken. He tried to locate Tennyson for an interview. That's when he learned that Floyd Tennyson was dead. In November 2017, Tennyson had died in a single-vehicle accident in Wyoming. His truck had gone off a mountain road late at night. The police report ruled it an accident, noting possible alcohol involvement, though no definitive BAC was recorded. Hollis wasn't satisfied. The timing was too convenient. He flew to Wyoming and reviewed the case file. The accident had occurred on a remote stretch of Highway 191, a winding mountain road with no witnesses. Tennyson's truck had gone over the edge, tumbling 200 feet. He died on impact. The investigating officer had noted skid marks, suggesting Tennyson had tried to brake, but there was no evidence of foul play. Hollis asked to see Tennyson's personal effects, which had been stored in an evidence locker. Among them, a wallet, some tools, work gloves, and a small spiral notebook. Hollis opened the notebook. It was filled with handwritten coordinates, survey notes, dates. On one page, dated February 27, 2016, the day Kira was supposed to return home, there was a set of GPS coordinates. Hollis checked them against a map. They matched the exact location of Garrett Voss's bunker. Next to the coordinates, in Tennyson's handwriting, were 2 words: job complete. Hollis felt the room tilt. This was it, the connection. Floyd Tennyson had been at the bunker on February 27th. He'd written job complete. He'd worked at a crematorium. He knew how to burn a body. But one question remained: had he acted alone? Hollis returned to Nevada and began digging into Tennyson's work in Ruby Valley. The mineral survey reports Tennyson had filed listed a client, Basin Resource Group LLC. Hollis pulled corporate records. Basin Resource Group was registered in Wyoming in 2014. The address was a mailbox service in Cheyenne. No phone, no website, no employees listed. The company had dissolved in 2017, shortly after Tennyson's death. Bank records, obtained through subpoena, showed minimal activity, mostly cash deposits, no traceable sources. It was a shell company, a front. Someone had hired Floyd Tennyson, likely through this fake company, to do surveying work in Ruby Valley. And at some point, that work had involved Kira Brennan. But who was behind Basin Resource Group? The trail went cold. Hollis tried everything. He contacted business registration offices, banks, former associates of Tennyson. Nothing led anywhere. Meanwhile, a retired wildfire investigator named Dale Henson saw the news coverage and contacted the sheriff's office. He explained that in remote areas, some people built improvised furnaces using repurposed materials: oil drums, refractory bricks, propane torches. With the right setup, temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit were achievable. You'd need knowledge, Henson said, but it's not impossible. I've seen poachers use them to destroy evidence: bones, hides, leaves almost nothing. This fit the forensic findings. Tennyson could have built a portable cremation device, transported it to the bunker, and used it to burn Kira's body. But why? What was the motive? Hollis had no answer. One theory, suggested by Agent Sung, was that Kira had stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to see. Illegal mining activity, a hidden operation, something worth killing to protect. But there was no evidence of illegal activity in the area. No reports, no complaints, no arrests. Another theory was that Kira had been targeted randomly, wrong place, wrong time, a predatory crime with no deeper motive. But the level of planning suggested otherwise. In late 2019, a hiker found camera lens fragments in a ravine 6 miles from the bunker. Forensics confirmed they matched Kira's Canon 5D Mark IV, but the memory card was missing. Had the killer tried to destroy the camera in multiple locations, or had Kira been trying to leave a trail? There was no way to know. By the end of 2019, the investigation had uncovered pieces of the truth, but not the whole picture. Floyd Tennyson was almost certainly involved, but he was dead, and the person or organization that had hired him remained a ghost. By 2020, the case of Kira Brennan's murder had reached an impasse. Floyd Tennyson was dead. Basin Resource Group was dissolved. The phone number on the receipt led nowhere. The person or persons behind the crime had vanished as completely as Kira once had. Officially, Kira's death was ruled a homicide. Tennyson was named as the primary suspect, though he could never be prosecuted. The case remained open, but with no active leads, there was nowhere left to go. Detective Hollis retired in 2021. At his retirement party, a colleague asked him if he had any regrets. "Kira Brennan," he said without hesitation. "I found her, but I didn't get justice for her. That'll stay with me." For Thea Brennan, the confirmation of her sister's death brought a strange kind of closure. Not peace, but an end to the not knowing. In June 2019, she held a memorial service for Kira. The remains, what little could be returned, were buried in a family plot in Oregon. The headstone read, "Kira Brennan, 1987-2016. Never lost." Thea published a book in 2021, Finding Kiera, A Sister's Search for Truth in the Nevada Desert. The proceeds went to missing persons advocacy groups. In interviews, she spoke carefully, choosing her words. "I'll never have complete answers," she said, "but I know she fought. Those scratches on the wall, she didn't give up. That's who Kiera was." The bunker where Kiera died was permanently sealed in 2020. The new property owner filled it with concrete, erasing the space where so much horror had occurred. A small plaque was placed nearby, private and unmarked. In memory of Kiera Brennan, 1987 to 2016. The desert is quiet there now, but questions remain. What did Kiera see or stumble upon that led to her death? Was Floyd Tennyson acting alone or following orders? Who was behind Basin Resource Group? What happened to Kiera's journal and camera memory card? Was the phone number on the receipt a planned meeting or a trap? Did she try to escape from the bunker before the fire? These questions may never be answered. Kiera Brennan's case stands as a reminder that even in the 21st century, even with forensic science and surveillance technology, some crimes remain unsolved. The desert keeps its secrets. And sometimes, even when we find the truth, we don't find justice. When Garrett Voss cut open that sack in March 2019, he didn't just find remains. He found the last trace of a woman who loved the desert's silence, its stark beauty, its honesty. Kiera Brennan went looking for wildflowers and light. She went looking for the quiet places where she could breathe. Instead, she found someone who turned her into ash. The desert is vast. Nevada alone contains over 110,000 square miles of it, endless expanses where a person can disappear and never be found. Kira almost became one of those permanent disappearances, a name without a grave, a story without an ending. But even ash can tell a story. The scratches on the bunker wall, "Help," and the single letter K are proof that Kira didn't give up. In her final moments, trapped in darkness, she fought. She left a message, hoping someone would find it. And someone did. Her killer thought fire would erase her completely, but they were wrong. Because Kira Brennan's story, incomplete as it is, will not be forgotten. Every year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, Thea returns to the Ruby Valley Desert. She doesn't go to the bunker. It's sealed now, buried under concrete.
Instead, she drives to the spot where Kira's forerunner was found and stands in the silence. "I used to come here hoping to find her," Thea said in a 2022 interview. "Now I come to remember her, to make sure the desert doesn't swallow her name the way it swallowed her body." Kira Brennan was a photographer, a sister, a woman who saw beauty in places most people overlooked. She deserved to grow old, to keep capturing light, to live. She didn't get that. But her story serves as a warning. The desert is beautiful, yes, but it's also unforgiving. And sometimes the danger isn't the heat, the snakes, or the isolation. Sometimes the danger is the people who hide in the emptiness. If you have any information about Kira Brennan's case, or if you knew Floyd Tennyson and have details that might help, the Lyon County Sheriff's Office asks that you contact them. Sometimes, even the smallest detail can break a case wide open. Because Kira's story isn't over. Not yet. Not until we know the whole truth. And the desert, for all its silence, is still keeping secrets. What do you think happened to Kira Brennan? Was Floyd Tennyson working alone, or was there someone else pulling the strings? Drop your theories in the comments below. And if this case moved you, share it. Awareness helps families like Thea's keep their loved ones' names alive. Thanks for watching Last Seen Stories. Until next time, stay safe out there.